Chapter 1. Felicity was the only Quinlan left living with Linda Culpepper. Now that wasn't a bad thing, because Linda treated her like royalty, but sometimes, she missed her sister and her cousins. They were all married off now, though. She was the last Quinlan standing, and she hadn't met any man who even began to turn her head. There had been some really good-looking men at the Culpepper town picnic on the 4th of July, but it was a town full of cowboys, so of course most of them were gorgeous. Not one had made her heart go pitter-patter, though. Not the way Patience and Grace had described their feelings upon meeting their own true loves anyway. As the only single woman left of the three bakers, she felt it was her job to make the bakery all it could be. She would turn it into a prize for all of Wyoming to love. It was her destiny, because obviously none of the cowboys of Culpepper were her destiny, as much as she wished she could find someone. She picked up the sheaf of papers she'd put together and drove to the bakery to meet with Arch O'Donnell and the building contractor he'd said he was bringing. She just wished she could remember his name. Walking toward the front door, Felicity called out over the roar of the daycare to Linda. "I'm heading to the bakery for my meeting." Linda magically appeared out of the mess of loud children. "Do you need anything?" Felicity shook her head. "No, I made cookies yesterday, and I'll serve coffee or whatever they want to drink." "I've got it. Is it still okay if I take your car?" "Of course it is. Keys are hanging by the door." "Have fun." Felicity smiled. "Thank you." She was sure she held the record for longest time to stay with Linda out of all the Quinlans. She'd been there since May, and it was now August. Early August, but still August. Of course, she didn't plan to set any speed records racing to the altar either. She just hoped Linda wouldn't mind if she was still there in a few months, or years. She sighed as she got into the car and started it. "Maybe I'll find my own place. Someone has to have a small apartment to rent or something." Her favorite thing about being in a car alone, which had never happened before coming to Wyoming, was talking to herself. She could carry on both sides of a conversation, and people just thought she was singing along to the radio. She drove the short distance to Culpepper Confectionery Creations and stopped in front of the building. There was Arch, walking around with another man pointing things out. Arch was a nice man, and Grace and Patience had tried to push her toward him, but he just didn't seem quite right for her. No, she needed something different. She wasn't sure what, but Arch O'Donnell was not for her. She gathered her things, got out of the car, and closed the door. "Good morning, gentlemen." Arch turned, but the other man continued poking the wood at the side of the bakery. "Hey, Felicity. I brought Allen Jennings, the building contractor I told you about, with me." "Oh, good. Thank you. It's nice to meet you, Mr. Jennings." The man continued to stare at the side of the bakery. She thought she may have heard a grunt of greeting, but she wasn't certain. Felicity refused to be offended. "Let me unlock the door, and we can go inside. I wish I could offer you chairs to sit in, but that's the whole problem and the reason you're here. We do have a back room, but it's pretty cramped back there." She opened the door and stepped inside, automatically going to the thermostat to turn on the air conditioning. At first, Patience had been against having the AC installed before they opened the bakery, but when Felicity had reminded her about how hot it was going to be in there with 6 ovens running at once, she'd quickly caved. The two men followed her in, and she got a look at Allen's face for the first time. She blinked twice. Had he come in with the influx of underwear models and just stayed to be a building contractor? Because if so, she wanted to find that photo shoot and ogle him in his underwear. She blushed at her thoughts. She never ogled men. Oh, but that man is worth ogling. She shook her head at herself, forcing her brain to concentrate on the business at hand. "We have stools I can pull up to the work table." "Let me do that." She hurried away to get the stools so they could have a real meeting, and she could get her hormones under control. That man, that gorgeous hunk of hot masculinity, was going to keep her very distracted. Maybe there was another building contractor they could hire, because if he stayed around, she would never get any work done. She reached for the first stool, but two huge hands came around her, lifting them out of her way and carrying them off to the counter where she and the other bakers stood to roll out dough and decorate cakes. She got the other stool and carried it to the counter, trying not to meet the contractor's eyes, watching as he set the stools down. He'd know. How could he not know that all I can think about is how he'd look in nothing but his underwear? She took one of the stools and found herself directly across from Mr. Sexy himself. Wait, what is his name again? Oh, crap. I can't remember his name. And he was just introduced to me. Thank you for meeting with me today, gentlemen. I've already explained our predicament to Arch, but I'm going to briefly reiterate. There. She sounded professional. She didn't sound like a dumb, hick blonde from Kentucky. She breathed deeply and continued. When we opened the bakery, we had no idea it would become such a popular breakfast destination. People come in here and sit in the windowsills at the front to eat, or they eat outside on a blanket, or they eat in their cars. We hear the same thing over and over. Our customers would like tables where they can eat their breakfast right here at the bakery. Arch nodded. I've drawn up some plans, and I had Allen look them over to give me his opinion about whether or not they're practical. Felicity looked at Allen, noticing his eyes for the first time. She felt like she was melting into a little puddle. He had those shoulders and hazel eyes? She'd never be able to close her eyes without dreaming about him again. And do you think they're feasible? Allen shrugged. Sure. I can make it happen. I'll have to knock out a wall, but that's not a big deal. Arch is planning a little dining room at the front of the bakery. We'll have to extend the parking lot further out, but that's the easy part. She noticed he didn't look directly at her as he spoke, but seemed to be focused on something about an inch above her head. I see. How long would it take? Would there be an interruption of business? Some. What days are you open? We work Tuesday through Saturday, which is why I asked you to meet me on a Monday. How much of an interruption of business? Felicity was proud of how calm her voice sounded as she talked to him. She brought her hand to her lips to check for drool, and when there wasn't any, she wanted to raise her arms in victory. What I can do, though it will be a little harder for me and cost a little more, is build the new area without removing the front wall. Then I can wait for a weekend to knock the wall out. Sounds perfect. She looked at Arch. May I see what you've come up with? There wasn't really a lot to do here. I know you want glass windows around the new room, so I drew those in and expanded the parking lot. Arch set two pictures in front of her. One was of the outside showing how it would look, and one was for the inside. Does that work for you? Felicity nodded. Yes, I think that'll be fine. She sucked in a breath, asking the important question. How much? Allen named a figure that was 25% less than they'd budgeted, and she breathed a sigh of relief. When can you start? I'll run to get supplies this afternoon, and I can start first thing tomorrow. We'll expand the parking lot first. I'll make up some pretty pardon-a-mess signs. Allen shrugged at her. Do what you want. Well, I think this calls for a celebration. She hurried into the kitchen and brought out the cookies she'd baked. I can make coffee to go with them. Allen shook his head. I'll take mine to go. I need to head to the supply store. Oh. Of course. I'll just box them up. Me too, Arch told her. I have some work to do for the Savoys. Valerie wants a garage apartment built for her sister. 2 bakery boxes coming up. Give me a minute. She hurried to get the boxes and split the cookies she'd made between them. She wasn't sure why, But her favorite part of baking was watching people actually eat her cookies, and she was disappointed not to get to see Allen's face when he bit into her special treat for the first time. Thinking of a solution, she kept 3 cookies out, handing one to each of the men and biting into the third. Arch grinned, taking a big bite of his. "Amazing as always, Felicity. Your cookies are a real marvel." Felicity grinned happily, her eyes going to Allen. He bit into his cookie and immediately raised an eyebrow at her. "These are pretty good. Thanks." He then took his box and left the bakery without a backward glance. Felicity frowned after him, wanting to ask questions, but not even sure where to start. "Thanks again, Arch. Happy to work with you. And don't worry about Allen. He's been weird since his divorce a couple of years back." Divorce? If he'd been divorced, her parents would never approve. "Remember, Felicity, you don't need approval anymore. Besides, Mama would say to throw him down and jump him. It's just Dad who would object." "I see. Well, thanks for your time." She cleaned up the small mess she'd made and locked the door after Arch had left, her mind still on Allen. She was determined she was going to get to know him. Cookies. The way to a man's heart was through cookies. What else would he need? Asterisk. After a quiet supper with just her and Linda that evening, Felicity helped with the cleanup. "Allen something or other is going to do the building work on the bakery. What do you know about him?" Linda grinned. "Did someone finally catch your eye?" Felicity blushed. "I don't know how I managed to speak coherently around that man. He's made of handsome and sexy, all wrapped into one very large package. He's also made of heartbreak. His wife ran off with one of the underwear models." "Really? I thought he might be one of the underwear models." Linda laughed softly. "No, I'm afraid not. I think he could do it though. I'm sure he could. I wouldn't mind him stripping down, so I could check and make sure though." She leaned against the counter, sighing after putting the last dish into the dishwasher. "I've never seen anything that affected my hormones quite so strongly. Get to know him. He's a good man. Just make sure you don't hurt him. He was a good friend of Colby's growing up, and it broke my heart when Wendy treated him so terribly. She even left their son when she ran off." "That gorgeous hunk of manhood has a son?" Linda nodded. "I think he's 9 or 10 now. Good kid. He's doing some kind of football camp right now, but he should be home soon." "What's his name?" "Tristan. You'll like him." "Oh, I doubt I'll get a chance to meet him. Allen's going to do the building work on the bakery, not have me over for a sexy picnic on his living room floor." Linda grinned. "He really does have your imagination running wild, doesn't he? Be careful not to go down the lane, skipping along after Chastity, into sexual la la land." "I'll do my best." Felicity sighed. "I think I need to go vegetate with some Netflix and a root beer tonight. I very much need root beer in my life." She'd never had a root beer before moving to Wyoming, but she'd found root beers very much to her liking. Try not to think about him. Drool over Jessie Savoy instead. Felicity shook her head. "Nah. I'm on Team Bob. Jessie was always too blonde and pretty for my tastes." Linda laughed. "Okay, you drool over Bob. Roy's going to be here to watch television with me in a little while." Felicity nodded, knowing that meant she would want to stay in her room for the rest of the evening. She'd accidentally walked in on the older couple kissing once, and it wasn't something she wanted to repeat. "Let the electricity be with you." Linda just gave her a blank look. "You know, he's an electrician?" Felicity sighed. "No one ever gets me." She walked back toward her room, thinking about how funny she was. She just wished she could find a way to express the funny in her head. Why, she could be a comedic baker. There was so much call for that in the world. Asterisk. Felicity went into work early the next morning. Patience and Grace usually opened, and Felicity would close with Ricky, a new employee, in the afternoons. She wanted to be able to tell her coworkers about the plans for the bakery. She'd even asked Ricky if she would be willing to work some extra hours that day, just so all four of them could talk before the bakery opened. They were all there at 5, and Felicity had the plans in hand. This is what we're doing, and it's only about 75% of budget. We'll have plenty of money left for chairs, tables, and even a bit of decorating. The others looked at the drawings, and Grace nodded. I think that'll be perfect. Patience grinned. Absolutely wonderful. Especially since you took care of it yourself. Ricky wrinkled her nose. I'm going to be cleaning all those tables several times per day, won't I? Felicity laughed. You are a low woman on the totem pole. No matter. I'll be the best darn table cleaner this bakery has ever seen. Ricky grinned. Felicity was glad to see the woman was getting calmer and calmer by the day. The more she got used to working with the 3 bakers, the more comfortable she became with the situation. Are Valerie and Jessie around this week? Ricky shook her head. No, but some guy came by yesterday to draw up plans for my garage apartment, and he kind of freaked me out. Felicity put her hand on Ricky's arm. Was it Arch? Yeah, I know he's safe. Jesse had him investigated because he knew he'd have to be around some when they weren't, but I can't seem to be around men yet. Come stay at Linda Culpepper's until Valerie and Jesse are back in town. She loves having company, and I was just thinking how much I missed having my sister and cousins living there. Ricky shook her head. I can't invite myself to stay with someone I don't know. You didn't. I invited you. Felicity looked at the clock on her phone. It was after 6, so she knew Linda would be up, preparing for her day with munchkins. I'm going to call her and ask permission, like I haven't talked to you yet. Ricky protested, but Felicity waved her off. When Linda answered, Felicity said, Hey, Linda. Can I invite Ricky to come and stay for a couple of weeks? Her sister and brother-in-law are in Texas filming. Oh, of course. She's such a sweet girl. I enjoyed meeting her at the bakery. Okay, I'll bring her with me when I come home tonight. Thanks. Felicity looked at Ricky. We'll go pick up your stuff after we close and take it over to Linda's. But if you don't come now, you'll hurt Linda's feelings. You don't want that. Ricky laughed. You're trying to manipulate me, aren't you? Nope. 'Cause I already did. A truck pulled up in front of the bakery, and Felicity frowned. We don't open for another hour. She walked toward the door. Whoever it is needs to come back at a decent hour. We don't even have muffins or coffee ready yet. Ricky hurried to the coffee pot. I'll do coffee. Patience rushed to the work table. I'm on the muffins and scones. Grace smiled. I'm working too. We'll be ready when those doors open. Felicity walked outside to see who was in the truck. We don't open for another hour. You'll have to come back. The door opened and Allen, the contractor, stepped out. Felicity had managed to convince herself that her reaction to him was just a fluke the night before, but she realized she was wrong. It wasn't a fluke. The man had some powerful sexual mojo going on. This is what time I start work every morning. He looked her up and down. You don't look much like a baker. Felicity frowned. How should I look? You should be much rounder, wearing an apron over a boring white uniform, and some silly hat on your head. I see. She walked back toward the bakery. I'll bring you a to-go cup of coffee as soon as it's ready. I'd appreciate that. Felicity walked into the bakery and closed the door, locking it again. The man was sexy, but rude. He'd been married, so why couldn't he talk more appropriately to women? She was going to make him act human toward her if it was the last thing she did. She wondered how he'd like some of her specialized cookies. That was the contractor. He starts work at this time every morning. I'm going to take him some coffee when it's ready. Ricky shook her head. That should be my job. Here to do grunt work, remember? Felicity sighed. You don't want to go near that man. He makes me weak in the knees. You already have a hard time being around men. You don't need one that's going to turn you all mushy. Ricky made a face at that. Why does he make you weak in the knees? Scary looking? Felicity blushed at that, and Patience pounced. Felicity, he's making you all hot and bothered, isn't he? I've got to meet this man. I'll take him the coffee. No, you won't. I'll take care of it. I can't believe my sister finally has a crush. Patience looked at Ricky. No man has ever made her feel like that. Ever. Well, Bob on Lazy Love, but who likes Bob? All of the intelligent women were on Team Jessie. Ricky laughed. I was totally Team Jessie. Imagine my annoyance when my own sister married the man I secretly fantasized about every night. You seem to have gotten over it, Felicity said with a laugh. Don't you change the subject. Spill, Felicity. I want to know everything there is to know about him. Patience refused to be distracted. Especially when it came to her sister's potential love life. I don't know a lot. I know he's really hot. Have you ever heard the term sex on a stick? Because I think that describes him really well. He's tall with light hair and hazel eyes. And his shoulders. I do appreciate a nice set of shoulders, always have, but his shoulders? Oh, I feel like I'm starting to drool. Am I drooling? Patience laughed. I don't see any drool. I can't believe my little sister is falling for a man. Does he have a name? I'm not falling in love with him. I'm just very much in lust with him. See the difference? You're a Quinlan. Where there's lust, love will follow. Oh, look. Coffee's ready. Want me to take it to him? Patience, if you don't get off my case about him, I swear I will kick you in the shin. Violence will get you nowhere. What would Daddy say about how his sweet little girl has been transformed? Felicity ignored her sister as she walked to the coffee pot and poured coffee into a to-go cup. She grabbed a couple of sugars and creams and went through the door Ricky held for her. She handed him the coffee with a little stir stick. I don't know how you take your coffee. Allen shrugged. Black is good. He looked at everything in her hands. Were you a Girl Scout? Nah. My dad thought the Girl Scouts were run by heathens who would try to convert me to all sorts of pagan practices. He raised an eyebrow. Really? She nodded. He's not known for his forward thinking, especially where his daughters are concerned. Obviously. Well, I'm going to go back in and bake the daily cookies. You bake cookies every day? She nodded. Cookies are my specialty. My cousin, Grace, specializes in cakes and my sister, Patience, specializes in pies, but I'm the cookie lady. I'll bring you some cookies later. I don't need cookies. Felicity made a face. Everyone needs cookies. Unless they're diabetic. You're not diabetic, are you? No, I'm not. Then you'll get some cookies. What's your favorite kind? He shrugged. I have a sweet tooth. I love them all. Then that's what you'll get. Thanks for helping us. Free coffee and cookies anytime you want. Allen watched her as she ran back toward the building. What was her game? No one was that nice unless they were playing some kind of game. Chapter 2. By the time Allen left work that day, he'd eaten enough cookies to put him into a diabetic coma, and he wasn't diabetic. Every time he turned around, Felicity was there offering him coffee, cookies, or a sandwich. He drove the 15 minutes home from the bakery wondering what had happened. The little brunette Spitfire had his mind spinning. He couldn't remember a time in his life when a girl had packed such a wallop. Not even Wendy, his ex-wife. He walked into the house, listening to the silence. He'd let Tristan stay home alone that summer for the first time, and he was used to the boy puttering around and making noise. He'd left for football camp on Sunday afternoon, though, and Allen would be home alone for once. In some ways it was a welcome change, because he wouldn't have to listen to the boy's endless chattering. But the loneliness was setting in now, and he wasn't all that sure he could handle it. Going upstairs to his bedroom, he showered the sweat and grime of the day off himself. He'd made some great strides on the bakery that day, and the whole project shouldn't take more than a month. He'd call in some help on the days he needed it, but for the most part, he'd do it all alone. Just the way he liked it. After his shower, he went back out to the main area, where the emptiness of the house caused him to sigh. He didn't want to be alone. What was it about having a woman doting on him all day that made the emptiness so much harder to bear? He grabbed his keys and walked out to his truck, making the short drive to Culpepper. He'd eat at the diner. The food was decent, and he didn't have to be totally alone all night. Besides, he'd put in a hard day, and he shouldn't have to figure out what to eat, then spend a lot of time making it for just himself. When he got to the diner, the first person he spotted was little Felicity Quinlan. What was she doing there? He thought for a moment about getting into his truck and driving clear over to Haskell for a bite to eat, but he took a deep breath and told himself to man up instead. He wasn't going to be able to show his face in town if people knew he was afraid of the little baker and the feelings she brought up. Felicity spotted Allen and waved. "Are you here alone?" He nodded. "Kid's out of town, so it's just me. Linda went out tonight, so it would have been just me. Ricky decided to wait until tomorrow to move in, or there would have been two of us. I couldn't see a single reason I should heat up the house to cook for one person, especially when the diner already has the stove going. So I figured I'd come here instead." "Sounds good." He wasn't going to give her any kind of encouragement. The woman would latch onto it and never let go. "So do you want to eat together, since we're both alone? I only see one booth free, and one of us will have to wait otherwise." When he hesitated, she hurried on. "Of course, we could always play rock, paper, scissors for it if you're afraid to be seen with me." He shook his head at her. "Why would I be afraid to be seen with you?" "I have no idea. But you look like you'd rather cut out your own tongue, cook it over a campfire, and eat that than sit with me." He sighed. "It's a small town. You don't know how people talk here." "Are you kidding me? I was raised in a small town. My cousins were the famous Quinlan quads. You'd think they were the only set of quadruplets ever born. Everywhere I went, people reported back to my parents. I didn't have time to get into mischief, because everyone could see my thoughts, and those were reported back to my parents as well. I've spent my whole life living under a microscope. If you want away from all that, you picked the wrong place, lady. You should have gone to a big city somewhere." "Oh, it's fine. At least here, no one is trying to keep me to some impossibly high moral standards. I once accidentally unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of my blouse at the same time. Do you realize what happened when people saw that tiny little expansive neck? 2 shopkeepers swooned, while the third called my father to get me and take me right back home where I belonged." Allen grinned in spite of himself. "And did your father come?" "I was sent to my room for 6 weeks, and was only allowed to eat bread and water. That's how I learned to bake." "By being in your room for 6 weeks?" he asked, puzzled. "Yes. I found this book on how to make a solar oven, So I built a small platform onto the edge of my windowsill, and I made myself a solar oven. Then my sister would smuggle baking supplies to me. If she'd been caught with that baggie full of powdered sugar, we'd have both been in deep water." He chuckled softly. "It's a good thing you didn't end up in a Turkish prison over that one." "I know. It was crazy. I shouldn't have acted so rebelliously to begin with. I was allowed to unbutton the top button, but just for breathing purposes." "That sounds like a reasonable rule." She grinned at him, thankful someone on the planet appreciated her humor, if only for a minute. "Have dinner with me, please? Don't make me eat alone." He sighed. "All right. I'll have dinner with you. But you're responsible for the talk. It will start around town." Felicity grinned, wondering if she'd get a reputation. She'd always wanted one for something other than being a good girl and baking cookies. She grabbed his arm, tugging him toward the doorway of the diner. "You won't regret it." "Are you sure about that?" Allen was already starting to regret it. When they got inside, they slipped into opposite sides of the only empty booth. Felicity smiled expectantly at him. "What?" he asked, frowning. "I'm waiting for you to make clever conversation, so I can express my delight at your wittiness." He blinked at her a few times. "Your delight at my wittiness?" "Well, sure. You don't want me to be delighted? I guess I could frown at you or grumble like I've seen old couples do. That could be fun too." He tilted his head to one side. "Can I ask you a question?" "Absolutely. Is this the beginning of our clever conversation? Have you ever spoken to a man before?" She shrugged. "Not before moving here, and I've never really been alone with a man. Even when I met with Arch the first time, my sister and my cousin were there. My parents had a rule that we weren't allowed to be alone with boys. Ever. We weren't even allowed to be alone with our dad. So this is as close as you've ever been to being alone with a man? Are you kidding me?" Felicity shook her head. "Weird, huh? I've never even been alone in a car with a man. I did talk to a few at the back of the church when I could sneak away from my father." "What about school?" He put his menu down to focus on her. "How did you go to school without ever talking to boys?" "I was homeschooled. I've seriously never done anything without someone watching me my whole life until we got here. Culpepper means freedom to me." Allen shook his head, disbelief in his eyes. "I can see why it would. How old are you?" 22. "Did you go to college?" "Sure. Online classes at an all-girls Christian university. Not even male teachers were allowed." She shrugged. "When we had to be on campus, there wasn't any danger of us running into a man." "So you've never held hands with a man? Never been kissed?" She shook her head again. "I think the only one of us that has been kissed by someone other than the man they married was Chastity." He stared at her for another minute as if she'd grown two heads and had started speaking in Parseltongue. "I can see why you feel so free in Culpepper. Do you like owning a bakery?" Felicity smiled. "Oh, yes. I don't know if I'd like being sole owner, but sharing the responsibility is wonderful. I love baking." "So do you bake those huge wedding cakes?" "No, that's all Grace. Sometimes, if she's short on time, I'll help her decorate. I don't like to, but I will. I specialize in cookies." "And who is Grace to you?" "Your sister? I can't figure the Quinlans out. There are a lot of us." She reached over and patted his hand, feeling as if she'd been zapped by electricity. Instead of removing her hand, she patted him again. Finally, she just took his hand in hers and held it. He looked down at his hand, which she'd pulled halfway across the table. "What are you doing?" "What do you mean?" "Well, you were about to answer my question about how you're related to Grace, and then you patted my hand." "A lot." And then you just latched onto it. Why? She shrugged. Consider it a science experiment. What kind of science experiment? Biology. When Allen just watched her, she sighed. Well, when I patted your hand, I felt this strange little zingy sensation, and I wanted to see how long it would take to go away. He blinked. Zingy sensation? Yeah, you know. Like when you accidentally stick a fork in a light socket to see what will happen after being warned against it your whole life. How do you accidentally stick a fork in a light socket? You don't think about it first, and you just do it, and then it throws you across the room into the opposing wall, and you have to pretend nothing happened, because you can't really admit to your parents that you just stuck a fork in a light socket after they've been telling you not to for the past 10 years. So you just calmly get up and go sit on the couch with your hands folded in your lap, staring off into space because you're sure you're going to die any minute with the way your head is spinning, and you can't tell anyone. Did you take any breaths at all when you said all that? He asked, finding her the most fascinating creature he'd ever met in his life. What does that have to do with anything? I've never heard anyone say that much, without even pausing for air. Do you do it often? She shrugged. Maybe. I don't know. I've never been allowed to talk much. I mean, Mama would let us talk during the day while Dad was at work, but we had to do school too, and Patience was always the more outgoing of the two of us, so I never really got many words out, because I never really had a chance. I never had hour-long chats with friends on the phone or spent time just talking about nothing with boys that I liked. My whole upbringing was weird, and I find myself completely unable to talk to real humans. You're talking to me. Sort of. Sort of? I am talking to you. I've said more to you than I've said to anyone in a very long time. What do you mean, sort of? I asked you how you're related to Grace, and you still haven't answered me. You're talking to me, but you're not really conversing very well. You're supposed to answer simple questions when they're asked, not go off on some sort of a tirade about science experiments and zingy sensations. He shook his head at her, still trying to understand exactly what was going on. She had a death grip on his hand. Has the zinginess stopped yet? It hadn't for him, but he wasn't about to tell her that. The very idea of what her reaction would be scared the crap out of him. She shook her head, leaning forward. Have you ever felt this strange zinginess before? He thought about that for a moment. Maybe a little, but not since high school. So it's normal, and I'm not going to die or anything? No, you're not going to die. What you're feeling is sexual attraction. She blushed, but refused to back down from the conversation. I was afraid of that. My dad would tell me I'm going to hell. What would your mom tell you? The slow grin that spread across her face frightened him, but just a little. She'd tell me to grab you and kiss you until the zinginess convinced me that you were perfect for me. The zinginess does not mean someone is perfect for you. She shrugged. I'm not so sure about that. I've never felt it before. You've never been alone with a man before. The waitress stopped at the table then, looking back and forth between them. Drinks, she asked casually, not introducing herself, which made Felicity believe she already knew Allen. I'd like iced tea. Felicity picked up her menu with her free hand. She'd only been in the diner a few times since her arrival in Culpepper, and she had no idea what she wanted. Just a Coke for me. After she'd walked off, Felicity quickly decided what she wanted before setting the menu aside. You don't think the zinginess means anything? He shook his head. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the zinginess doesn't mean you should spend the rest of your life with someone. It just means that you have some attraction to them. She shrugged. I can believe that, but for a girl who has never had the zingy thing happen to her, it's pretty darn miraculous, and I like it. So stop complaining. He grinned, refusing to argue with her for another second. He was feeling pretty darn zingy himself. So how are you related to Grace Wells? I'll give you the whole rundown. Hope, Faith, Joy, and Chastity are quadruplets. They're my cousins. Grace and Honor are their younger sisters, and are twins. Their mother never had a single birth. It's the 6 of them in that family. Our fathers are brothers. Patience, the other founder of the bakery with Grace and me, is my sister. Simple, huh? Very, now that you've finally answered my question. He looked down at their hands that were still joined in the middle of the table. Are you planning on ever giving my hand back? She shrugged. Do you need it for something right now? Not at the moment, but I am right-handed and I will need to eat eventually. I might let you do that. Depends if the zinginess stops first. This is an important biology experiment, you know. So important I may not be allowed to eat. Sometimes you have to take one for the team. The team being scientific discovery, of course. Of course. What else would the team ever mean? Allen made a face. Should we see if we can increase the zinginess? Increase it? I'm not sure that's possible. Oh, trust me. It's possible. He tilted his head to one side, studying her face. You feeling brave? Felicity nodded slowly, a little afraid of what he'd do. I think so. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing it softly, watching her face the whole while. Well? Did that help the zings? She sucked in a breath, shocked at what that did to her system. Yup, that really upped the zinginess quotient of this whole thing. Craziness. I now understand why our church preached the need to marry before kissing. If there's this much zinginess with just hand-holding and hand-kissing, I think you should be naked and horizontal before the kissing starts. He blinked at her honesty. Yeah, I can see why some people feel that way. You don't? I do now. I feel like a hypocrite for saying it, though. Why? I married because my girlfriend was pregnant. We were just barely out of high school. I wouldn't have married her otherwise. I'd have gone to Wyoming University on a football scholarship. Do you regret it? He shrugged. I don't and can't regret my son. He's the most amazing kid in the world, and I love him. Do I regret the disappointment I caused my family? Of course I do. Do I sometimes wonder where my life would be today if I hadn't married and gone off to college? Absolutely. I don't think I'd change things if I could, though, because I wouldn't give Tristan up for anything. I can understand that. Felicity sighed softly. I feel like I've been locked in a cage my entire life, and have no idea what's going on in the world around me. I hate it. He frowned. So what are you going to do about it? She laughed. I've already done what I'm going to do. I left Kentucky, and I moved to Culpepper, opening my own business with 2 of my very favorite people in the whole world. Where do you live? I'm still staying with Linda Culpepper. We were all staying there when we first moved here, but as soon as we get to town, we start dropping like flies. Dropping like flies? Sorry, everyone got married very fast. My head was spinning. I came with the second round, and I'm the only one left. You haven't found anyone special yet? Felicity shook her head. That should have been obvious by the lack of zinginess in my life before this evening. I guess it should have. You don't want to marry? She shrugged. I think I do, but I want to marry the right person. It's not a compulsion to wear white. It's that I want to spend the rest of my life with my soulmate. So far, I haven't found him. Well, thanks to the zinginess, she was sure she had found him, but she was equally sure he'd have an argument as to why he wasn't the right person. Their drinks arrived then, and they placed their orders. So tell me about your soulmate, he suggested, taking a sip through his straw. Well, if I knew him already it would be easier to do. Give me an idea of who you think he is. She thought hard about that, sipping on her drink while she did. I don't care much what he looks like, but he should look exactly like you if possible, and he should be kind. I don't care what he does as long as he has a good work ethic and does it well. Does that make sense? A trash collector who works hard is just as valuable to this world as a college professor. And more valuable than a college professor who doesn't work hard. I understand what you mean. What else? She shrugged. More than anything, he has to be a good person. Someone who won't cheat, will work hard, and love me with everything inside him. Is that asking too much? He grinned, shaking his head. Doesn't sound like too much at all. It doesn't? Well, I sure don't think so, but people are always telling me I have unrealistic expectations. About what? Well, I once asked my doctor if he could do radiation on me, because I wanted to grow wings and get the power of flight, but he said that was unrealistic. If a man can develop the powers of web spinning and climbing up walls from a radioactive spider, then I think radiation would give me some wonderful superpowers. He said no. What a killjoy. Allen was surprised by how much he was starting to like her. Her perspective on things, loony though it was, made him smile. I know. And my dad yelled at me when I mentioned it. He said I needed to keep my feet firmly planted in reality. Then he prayed over me for a while. And then I went into my room and read a romance novel I'd smuggled in. Romance novel, huh? Yeah. Who wouldn't read a book where you're guaranteed a happily ever after? People who read books, not knowing what they'll get at the end, are crazy. I want my emotional payoff in every book, thank you very much. Their food appeared before them, and Felicity smiled at the waitress. It was so nice to have choices in food, choices in everything. Her parents had only ever cooked extremely healthy foods. She hadn't ever been able to live the way she wanted to live. Now she could do anything she wanted, and every day was a day of discovery, a day of endless possibilities, and she couldn't be happier. Chapter 3. Do I get my hand back now that the food is here? Allen asked. Felicity thought about it for a moment, looking down at his food. Well, you got a burger. It's not like you need a fork to eat a burger. I think I'll keep it just a little bit longer. This is a two-handed burger. Look at how big it is. I need both hands. She sighed. But if I give you your hand back, and I want to feel the zing again, is it gone forever? What will I do if I never get to feel that special zing again? He shook his head at her. If the zing doesn't come back with hand holding, I'll find another way to make the zing return. Now can I have my hand back? You make it sound like making the zing happen is work. I don't want you to have to work so hard on my behalf. She reluctantly released his hand for a moment, before grabbing it again. We're safe. The zing started as soon as I touched your hand again. You may eat. Oh, thank you so much. I had no idea eating dinner with you was going to turn into a quest for zinginess. Neither did I. It's been wonderful, hasn't it? Her brown eyes were wide as she asked. He thought about it for a moment, and realized he'd had more fun with her in the 30 minutes since they'd sat down together, than he had since his wife left, maybe since high school. I hesitate to admit it, but it has been pretty great. You're an interesting woman, Felicity. After they finished their meal, he paid for both of them. She tried to insist that he should let her pay, because he was her employee, but he refused. Walking out to the parking lot with her, he stopped at Linda's vehicle. I'm glad you insisted we have dinner together. I really enjoyed it. She grinned at him. Me too. We'll have to do it again sometime. You know you're supposed to wait for me to ask you out, right? She shrugged. You're slow as molasses. So, when can I see you again? He reached out and tapped her nose with his forefinger. Tomorrow. I'll be working for you all day. She pouted. But my sister and my cousin watch us every time we talk. They do? Well, sure. They know I think you're the sexiest thing this side of the Mississippi, and I've never really thought that about anyone, so they're curious. Allen blinked. I'm almost afraid to ask, but how do they know that you think I'm the sexiest thing this side of the Mississippi? Felicity wrinkled her nose at him. I told them, of course. How else would they know? I even have my sister check for drool every time I go back into the bakery. He choked back a laugh. I've never noticed you drooling. Oh, good. I'm sure it's going to happen, but I'd rather you didn't notice. How embarrassing would that be? I'm trying to be professional around you. And doing a marvelous job of it. She sighed happily, smiling up at him. If I wasn't trying to be professional, I'd probably ask you to kiss me goodnight so I could see what the zinginess quotient of that would be, but I can't do that. It's probably best if I never kiss anyone before marriage. Seriously. I think it might kill me. He leaned down and kissed her cheek. There. That's as close as I'm going to get to a real kiss. She smiled. Your cheek kisses sure pack a zingy wallop. Good night, Felicity. Thank you for being your entertaining self and keeping me company for dinner. I'll see you tomorrow. She got into the vehicle and started it, forcing herself to drive away without looking back at him. She was sure he could see the longing in her eyes. That man had zinginess down to a science. She felt electrified from her head to her toes. He had to be the man for her. Asterisk. Felicity went into work an hour early on Wednesday morning, knowing she wanted to bake some of her specialty cookies for Allen. He was already hard at work when she pulled up. Are you thirsty? She asked. He nodded, wiping sweat off his forehead with the back of one arm. I am. Coffee? Or something cold? Or I could do iced coffee. Something cold, but not coffee. Part of the allure of coffee is drinking it really hot. He turned back to his work while she hurried into the bakery. Felicity immediately went to the glass case to see what was left of her cookies from the day before and selected one of her favorites. It looked like a simple chocolate chip cookie, but her cookies were never simple. She made them with a combination of milk and white chocolate so they exploded with flavor when you took a bite. Ignoring her sister and cousin, she took out a plate, added a doily, and put 3 cookies on the plate, arranging them nicely. Then she hurried over to the drinks they kept in a cooler, removing a bottle of water. She'd make him lemonade later, but water would have to work for now. She hurried back out the door and walked to where he was working. Water and cookies. Allen turned to her and grinned. Couldn't just bring water, could you? Felicity shook her head. Of course not. I'm plying you with cookies so you'll make me zing some more later. He laughed softly, reaching for one of the cookies. Chocolate chip? One of my favorites. She watched while he bit into one, his smile growing. You like? I do like. He opened the water bottle and took a big swig of the liquid inside, then proceeded to eat a second cookie in one bite. Aren't you going to have one? She shook her head. Of course not. They're all for you. He grabbed the third cookie and ate it quickly. Do you ply all the men with cookies? Of course not. No other men make me feel like you do. I'd list all the places you make me tingle, but I'm being a professional. Of course you are. I'll bring you more cookies later. As she turned to walk away, he called out to her, unable to stop himself. Hey, Felicity? She turned back, a grin on her lips. Yes, Allen? I think I'm going to call you Cookies. It suits you better than Felicity. She laughed. I'd like that. Rushing back into the bakery, she put the plate into the dishwasher and grabbed the book of recipes she'd perfected. Flipping through, she found another one of her favorites. She called them lemon doodles. She'd make lemonade to go with them. Patience walked over to her and looked over her shoulder. Lemon doodles? You're pulling out the big guns. Felicity nodded. I'm in love. Oh, you are? Patience studied her sister. When I touch him, I feel this incredible zingy sensation all through me. He's something else. Patience just laughed. Make your cookies. He'll be eating out of the palm of your hand in no time. Grace stood and watched the two sisters with a smile on her face. She said nothing as she got back to work, baking all the layers for another huge wedding cake. With all the recent weddings in Culpepper, she liked to have one in the freezer ready to ice at all times. Made it easier when she had a rush job to do, and she always seemed to have a rush job to do. Asterisk. An hour later, Felicity arranged some of the lemon doodles nicely on a plate with a fresh doily. Then she poured some of the freshly squeezed lemonade she'd made into a to-go cup and carried both out to him, with Patience calling out to her as she went. You go, girl. Felicity blew a kiss over her shoulder as she pushed open the bakery door. She walked to the front of the building, smiling as she saw that Allen had kindly removed his shirt, giving her a view of his bare torso. And shoulders. His shoulders were bare too. She was sure she wouldn't be able to speak coherently when she saw them, but what did coherence matter when she could look at him? Allen was turned away from the bakery, bending over to grab a piece of wood, when he heard her voice. Time for lemonade and cookies. He straightened up, thinking for a moment about tugging his t-shirt back over his head, but he didn't want to. He wanted to see her reaction to him in his shirtless state. Sounds wonderful. He turned to look at her, looking down at the prettily arranged cookies on the plate. You know you could just throw those into a bag for me, right? She nodded, her eyes glued to his shoulders. I know. It's more fun this way. He reached for the glass and took it from her, stifling a grin at her reaction to his bare chest. What kind of cookies did you make for me? She swallowed hard, forcing her eyes to his. Lemon doodle. He bit into it, feeling the mixture of sour and sweet explode on his tongue. I've never heard of a lemon doodle. Of course you haven't. They're my own invention. Pretty amazing, huh? His eyes were on her face as he nodded his agreement. Incredible. Her eyes dropped to his shoulder. May I touch it? He blinked a few times. You can't just ask a man if you can touch him. She frowned. So I should do it without asking? No, you should not do it without asking. So how can I see if I feel all zingy if I touch your bare shoulder? I'm not supposed to ask. I'm not supposed to just do it. What am I supposed to do? He shook his head. You worry me sometimes, cookies. She frowned at him. Please? He looked over at the bakery and saw 3 faces pressed to the glass of the door watching them. Look over at the bakery door, and then decide if you want to touch me. If you're still willing, then I am too. Felicity looked at the door and saw all 3 of her coworkers standing there watching her with Allen. She waved them away, trying to get them to stop watching. When they just waved back, she sighed. Fine, but leave your shirt off all day, and I'll find a way to touch your shoulder later. Her eyes met his. Do you have any idea of how very sexy your shoulders are? He'd finished the cookies and handed her the empty to-go cup. Is there anything you won't say? She shrugged. I don't have a shy bone in my body. Is that a bad thing? I'm trying to decide. She laughed, walking back toward the bakery. See you in about an hour. He watched her go, charmed more than he cared to admit. There was something about Felicity Quinlan that made him want to throw her down and ravish her, just as soon as he was done carrying her around in his pocket protecting her. When Felicity got back into the bakery, she put her hands on her hips and glared at the others. He would have let me touch his shoulder if you hadn't been watching. You ruined everything. Ricky blinked a few times. Why did you want to touch his shoulder? Did you see his shoulders? Felicity countered. Patience and Grace laughed hysterically. Hush, you two. And don't watch next time. I want to be able to touch him if the mood strikes me. Patience shook her head at Felicity. And what are the chances the mood will strike you? Oh, about 100%. She walked over to her cookbook and flipped through for another cookie. Oh, my caramel brownie cookies. He'll like those. Grace frowned at Felicity. You know you need to actually do your job and make cookies for the bakery too, right? Oh, I am. I don't have any special orders today, and I'm making batches of 6 dozen. He only gets 3 from each. Patience sighed. Our customers are going to always expect a huge assortment of cookies, and we'll have to explain it was Felicity's way of showing a man she was interested. Grace shook her head. I'm explaining nothing. Felicity can explain. Felicity looked at Ricky. Low man on the totem pole. Ricky just kept washing the display case. I'm not even going to listen to you anymore. You have to. I'm your boss. My crazy boss. Ricky mumbled something else under her breath as she kept cleaning. Felicity decided not to ask. She didn't want to have to get on to the sweet girl for saying what everyone else was thinking. Asterisk. An hour later, she was back outside with a couple bottles of water and the caramel brownie cookies. You know, if we had chairs inside, you could sit and eat your snacks. He turned to her, grinning. He was starting to look forward to his cookie breaks. True. But then I would not only be working for you, I'd have to put on a shirt. He reached out and took one of the cookies, sighing happily as he bit into it. What do you call these? Caramel brownie cookies. You should change their name to Caramel Heaven. My father would say that's sacrilegious. And you care? Oh, probably not. Now it would be sacrilegious for you to put your shirt back on. Her eyes stared at his shoulders and bare chest as if she wanted to eat him up. Oh? She nodded. You were created in God's image. And what an image he must have had. She licked her lip. Can I touch your shoulder? Why are you obsessed with my shoulders? Have you looked in a mirror lately? Felicity sighed. I've got to see what it feels like. You're losing your mind. He glanced over at the bakery and found there was no one with their nose stuck to the glass. She must have told them to stop that when she went in. Go for it. Really? She practically squealed and was trying not to bounce up and down. He nodded, bracing himself for her touch. Yeah, you're just going to keep bugging me about it till I agree. She shrugged. Probably. That's what I do. She reached out one hand and touched the smooth skin of his shoulder, surprised at the strength under it. Wow. It's really hard, but smooth at the same time. And zingy? He knew he was opening a can of worms by asking, but he was certainly feeling the zing. It would be nice if she was as well. She nodded, looking up into his eyes. Oh, so zingy. You should bottle that up and sell it. You'd make a fortune. Bottle what up? The zingy quotient. He grinned. Do you want to have dinner tonight? I desperately want to have dinner tonight, but I'm going to help Ricky move some of her things to the big house. She's alone at the ranch Valerie and Jesse bought, and she's not ready to be alone after what happened in March. You know, I've heard a lot of people vaguely mention what happened to Ricky in March. What happened to her? I feel like I'm gossiping talking about it, but it was on the news. Felicity sighed, knowing he should understand because he and Ricky would be around each other. Valerie's ex-boyfriend kidnapped her. Held her hostage in exchange for Valerie, who took her place and shot the creep. I had no idea. He felt bad for even asking. Felicity nodded. So she's kind of afraid of men, and she's not quick to open up with women. We just got her to the point where she doesn't jump at every loud noise in the bakery. That's really sad. It makes you want to protect her from all harm. I know. I hate it. She's really a sweet girl. I'm glad she has Valerie and Jessie. She's Valerie's kid sister, right? And I know Valerie is some kind of big star, but I don't know what she's been in. Her eyes widened, and she stared at him in shock. You've never seen Lazy Love? No. What's Lazy Love? It's only the best show on TV right now. All of us watch it. It's about a debutante who inherits a ranch. She falls almost immediately for the veterinarian, and they finally just let them get married on the show. Jessie plays the vet. Valerie plays the debutante? Yes. They are amazing together. The chemistry on screen makes me tingle almost as much as touching you. Wow. He shook his head. I need to get back to work. If you want help moving Ricky tonight, just let me know. I'll ask her. I think she'll probably say no, but I'll ask. I'm a non-scary man. Felicity shrugged. I don't know about that. You make my knees awfully weak. Asterisk. Felicity was back outside again an hour later. It was getting to the point where Allen could set his watch by her. He considered telling her that he only took breaks every 2 hours, but why ruin the fun? He put down his hammer when he saw her approaching. Taking one of the bottles of water from her, he drank down half a bottle in one gulp. What did you bring me this time? Cinnamon roll cookies. I didn't make this recipe up, but I did tweak the one I got from the internet a little. It needed a bit more cinnamon and a bit less salt. He reached for a cookie and bit into it, smiling. You are an absolute genius, cookies. Where did you learn to bake this way? And don't tell me that story about building a solar oven on your windowsill again, because I'm not buying it. My father felt very strongly that women should only learn the domestic arts, so my mom taught us to bake. Patience gravitated toward pies, but I liked cookies better. Our father approved, because that meant we were always ready to donate something tasty to the church bake sale. Did your mother bake well? Felicity shrugged. You know, she never really did. She was more of a cook than a baker. She'd let us make dessert every single night, knowing it would bring us praise from our father, and that's the only way we were going to get him to say anything kind. Allen frowned. He doesn't sound like a man I'd want to meet. He is awful, but Mama loves him a great deal, so she stays with him. She just made sure she homeschooled so she could give us some freedom. I'm still not following that. How does homeschooling give freedom? It gave us the days while he was at work to read what we wanted to read. To learn subjects he'd never have approved of. We had to learn our curriculum, but then Mama would let us read books that we wanted to read. Do you have any idea how many romance novels I've read? Mama made sure they were sweet until I was about 16, but then she figured I was old enough to read about people having sex, and it wouldn't kill me. She let us watch TV shows Dad never would have approved of. Like Lazy Love? Exactly like Lazy Love. There were scenes in that show that Dad would have thrown a fit over. There was never sex before marriage in the show, but there was some kissing. And there were some scenes that led up to their engagement that had my knickers in a wad. Oh really? She nodded slowly. I could show you how to act one of them out. No kissing before marriage, remember? You're too susceptible to the tinglies. Tinglies. I like that word. She noticed he'd finished his snack and handed him the unopened bottle of water, taking the empty one from him. See you soon. He watched her go, a smile on his face. Felicity Quinlan was something else. Chapter 4. When Felicity approached Ricky about Allen helping her with the move, the younger girl shook her head emphatically. No way. There's not enough stuff that needs to be moved to bother. It's really mostly clothes. Felicity nodded, patting Ricky's arm and smiling when the girl didn't flinch. Sounds good. I'll let him know. I thought that's what you'd say, but I wanted you to know he offered. Ricky smiled, her face white at the very idea. I'll be able to be around men again someday. Did you date before that happened? Ricky shook her head. No, I've had a crush on Jesse Savoy since I was 17 or so. I figured I had a chance since my sister actually knew him. And then she married him, ruining all my life plans. Felicity laughed. Half the world had a crush on Jesse Savoy. Does he scare you? Oddly enough, he doesn't. But then again, he was instrumental in getting me away from Curtis. When Felicity took her next batch of cookies out to Allen, she told him Ricky would feel uncomfortable if he helped as she held out the cookie plate. I feel bad for her, but I understand why she doesn't want me there, I guess. He looked at her carefully. Maybe you could move her after dinner in town? I really want to go to dinner with you, Allen, but I can't leave Ricky alone with Linda until she gets to know her a little better. I feel like we're kind of responsible for her. I can understand that. I just wanted to see you tonight. Because you like the zingies too? He laughed. Of course, I like the zingies. And you're like a puzzle to me. Getting to know you has become something of a challenge. She trailed a finger down the center of his chest. And you like challenges? Allen shivered at the feeling of her touch, and caught her hand in his. You're killing me, cookies. He looked down at her plate. Tell me about these cookies. Her eyes stayed locked on his as she answered. These are caramel stuffed apple cider cookies. I hope you like caramel as much as I do. I do. It's a favorite of mine. He looked at the hand he still gripped tightly. If I let go of your hand, do you promise to be good? She nodded emphatically. We have a customer pulling up, so I have to be. He let go of her hand and reached for one of the cookies. These are amazing. Why isn't there a line around the building for your cookies? There has been a few times. Not all the time, though. I don't think any of us could deal with the pressure of that. A lot of our baking is done to order. If I wanted to go into the bakery and mix and match a cookie order, could I buy a couple of dozen cookies that way? Oh, sure. We do that all the time. I like to keep a variety out there for people. She didn't add that she didn't usually bake as many types of different cookies as she did that day, because it was so much more work than making 2 or 3 different kinds for people to choose from. She didn't want him to know she was trying to impress him with her cookies. I'll have to do that for my son when he gets home on Saturday. I can't wait to meet him. Do you like kids? Allen asked. He hadn't dated at all since his wife had run off, and he wasn't sure he was ready to start. Looking at Felicity was sure motivation, though. Felicity nodded. I've always loved kids. I spent a lot of time taking care of the ones I knew. You were allowed to babysit? He asked in mock horror. In my own home, with my mother supervising. I never would have been allowed to be unsupervised myself. You never know what kind of trouble I might get into. She took his empty water bottle before heading back into the bakery. A few hours later, Felicity stepped into the Savoy house, surprised at how down-to-earth everything looked. She'd expected a mansion, but really it was just a large house, very similar to the one she lived in with Linda Culpepper. She followed Ricky up the stairs and took the armload of clothes she was handed, carrying it down to Ricky's car, which they'd come over in together. It took less than 30 minutes to load up everything Ricky felt the need to take with her into the car. Linda called to say she was going out with Roy tonight, so it's just going to be us. Who's Roy? Ricky asked. Roy is a local electrician that Linda has feelings for. She's been a widow since Chris was little, so we're all thrilled to see her dating someone who can make her happy. Oh, that's great. I like her. She seems so nice. Felicity grinned. Oh, she really is. How would you feel about going to the diner in town for dinner? I don't feel like cooking. I think I broke my own record for the most amount of different kinds of cookies baked in one day. That's because you were trying to catch Allen's eye. I've never seen a girl work so hard to catch a man's attention. What's he like? Oh, he's wonderful, Ricky. I'm already in love, and I just met him Monday. Have you ever met a man who made you feel the way you feel when Dylan and Joe kiss on Lazy Love? Ricky shook her head. No. I expected Jesse to make me feel that way when I finally met him, but it didn't happen. I wanted it to. By then he was already married to your sister. Did you really want to have feelings for him? Ricky shrugged. I guess not, but I still thought I would. I'd had a crush on him forever. What about Bob Bodefeld? What's he like? I always thought he was really sexy. Ricky made a face. He's nice enough, I guess. Kind of cynical. I only met him once, when I spent the day on set. It was a neat day, but Bob didn't do anything for me. I'm on Team Bob. Ricky laughed. I promise not to tell Jesse. Like he'd care. He has the only woman in the world he's ever wanted. It's obvious, isn't it? I've never seen a couple more in love. Makes me want to puke at times. I don't feel like I should be there. Well, you're getting your own little garage apartment. That'll be nice. Yeah, it will. I'm excited about that, although I'm not sure how I'll do with being alone all the time. Felicity frowned. You're a strong woman, Ricky. You're going to get through this. I sure hope so. I don't want to spend the rest of my life hiding from men. Ricky pulled up in front of the diner, and Felicity almost laughed when she got out and found herself face to face with Allen. Fancy meeting you here. I thought you were eating with Linda, he asked in surprise. She had a date, so it's just Ricky and me. Felicity looked over at Ricky, who looked very uncomfortable. Ricky, this is Allen. Allen, this is Ricky Dobson, Valerie Savoy's kid sister. Allen smiled and nodded at the frightened woman. It's nice to meet you, Ricky. Your name is unusual. Where did it come from? The question seemed to make Ricky relax. My parents named us both V names after our dad. His name was Victor, so my name is really Veronica. I hated always following along in Valerie's shadow, so when I was 12 and started junior high, I announced to everyone my name was Ricky, and I refused to respond to Veronica anymore. It took a month or two, but it worked, and I've been Ricky ever since. I like it. Felicity hadn't heard the story before. The three of them walked into the diner, where Brenda was busy seating people. 3? She asked. Felicity shook her head. No, I'm here with Ricky. Allen's alone. Brenda made a face. We only have one booth right now. Eat together. Felicity looked at Ricky. It's completely up to you. Don't feel pressured. Ricky finally nodded. Yeah, let's all eat together. It's not fair to make Allen wait, just because I'm skittish. Felicity slid into one side of the booth and waited for the others to land where they would. She was surprised when Ricky sat across from her, and Allen slid in beside her. Happy, but surprised. Allen smiled at the pretty little baker beside him and squeezed her hand. Don't go off on a tangent about zinginess now. You don't want to scare Ricky. Felicity leaned over and rested her head on his shoulder for a moment before turning her attention to the menu. She quickly decided what she wanted and looked over at Ricky. You've eaten here, right? Ricky nodded. Yeah, I've eaten here a bunch in the evenings. I hate being home alone, so I come out here, but then I get home and I'm scared when I get there. She rolled her eyes. I'm a mess and a half right now. Felicity grinned at her friend. I've seen huge strides just since you came to work for us. Allen looked back and forth between the two women, wondering if he should just act like he knew what happened, or pretend he knew nothing. Felicity leaned forward. I want you to know that I told Allen today what happened to you in March. Just briefly, so he'd know to stay away from you for the most part. Ricky nodded. That's fine. It's not like there weren't a million news stories about it anyway. It's got to be weird being the object of so much attention because of your sister's fame. Does it bother you at all? He asked. No, not really. I've been dealing with it for 4 years now. Lazy Love is about to start its 5th season. Felicity grinned. Do you know if they're going to work Valerie's pregnancy into the storyline? Absolutely. They're going to have to. She's already showing, and she's going to be huge soon. Jesse's loving every second of it. How's Valerie feeling? She's having a hard time with the heat of the Texas summers, but other than that, she's fine. Ricky shrugged. As soon as they filmed the episode with her announcing her pregnancy, she won't have to be out in the heat as much. For now, they're letting her put cold packs in her pockets, and she's drinking a lot of water between scenes. Brenda came over to their table to get their drink orders. After she was gone, Allen looked at Ricky. Where did you live before you moved here with Jesse and Valerie? I lived with my mom in a small town in Iowa. I needed to have a fresh start, though, and Jesse and Valerie knew they wanted a nanny while they were here, so I'll be a nanny 1 week out of every month for free room and board. So you'll be taking a week off at the bakery every month? Ricky shrugged. I seriously doubt it will come to that. I don't think Valerie will really let anyone be a nanny the 1 week out of each month she can completely devote to that baby. She was just trying to get me out of Iowa. Felicity grinned. I'm glad you're here. You make the bakery run a great deal more smoothly. Only because having me there means that you don't have to be there every minute the place is open. I want to learn to bake at least one kind of cookie tomorrow. You already bake a mean chocolate chip. Felicity protested. Yes, but I want to learn to bake one of your specialties. Ricky looked at Allen. Which of her specialties did you like best today? Oh, definitely the caramel stuffed apple cider. I thought I was going to faint from sheer pleasure of those things hitting my tongue. Allen could close his eyes and still taste them. That's what I want to learn to bake then. Will you teach me? Felicity nodded. Part of the agreement when they took her on was that they'd teach her to bake, and she wouldn't only do grunt work forever. It was time. Yeah, I'll teach you. We'll make a huge batch tomorrow. Ricky practically bounced up and down in her seat. Do you mean it? You'll teach me? Felicity laughed. I never agree to things I don't mean. And we'll make Allen taste them and let us know if they're as good as he remembers. Oh, please don't torture me, Allen said, putting the back of his hand to his forehead. Yes, because Allen hates my cookies. I can tell every time he takes a bite. Cookies? Allen asked. Felicity looked at him. Yes? Hush up. Felicity looked at Ricky. He started calling me Cookies, and I think I like it. Isn't it a sweet name for just him to call me? I've never had a nickname before. Ricky grinned. I love my nickname. Felicity looked at Allen. Do you have a nickname? He shrugged. Some people call me Al, but I prefer Allen. I'll come up with something for you. Let me think on it. Allen groaned. I don't want my name to be Zingy or anything like that. She frowned at him. I would never call you Zingy. It would be too hard to explain to random strangers. I'll come up with something really good. Allen looked over at Ricky, his eyes wide. Please help me. Ricky giggled. You're not a scary man after all. I wish my kid brother was here. You'd love him. Where is he? She asked. He graduated from college a couple of years ago with a degree in agriculture, so he's now running his own business helping Montana ranchers. He's going to move back here in another year or so to take over our grandfather's ranch when he retires. Well, I'm sure I'll meet him then. Ricky shrugged. I'm not exactly ready to start a relationship right now. Maybe someday I will be. I guess I wasn't thinking of that. Ricky nodded to Felicity. What about you two? Are you starting a relationship? Allen hadn't expected the point-blank question and wasn't quite sure how to respond. I don't know yet. I think Felicity is really special, but I'm not sure I'm the right man for her. She should start out with a man with no kids. Ricky made a face. I have a feeling that doesn't matter to Felicity at all. It wouldn't matter to me. Where's your kid now? With his mom? Allen frowned. His mother ran off with one of the underwear models. He knew both women would understand what he meant. No one was in Culpepper for long before hearing about the underwear model shoot that had ended in a blizzard and most of the town's women running off with the models. She hasn't had any desire to see him since. He's at football camp this week. He'll be home Saturday. How old is he? Ricky asked, while Felicity let the same information she'd heard from Linda sink into her mind in a different way. He's 10 and the most incredible kid alive. I'm ready for him to get back here. Name's Tristan. Oh, I like that, Ricky said. What grade is he in? He's going into 5th. Being a single dad wasn't something I ever planned to do, but I sure do love my kid. It's sad that his mom doesn't want to see him. He needs a new mom. Don't you think Felicity is good mom material? Don't push it, Ricky. Ricky laughed, the sound traveling around the diner. It was a light tinkling laugh that sounded like her sister's. I'll back off. Brenda came back with their drinks and took their orders. She looked pointedly at Allen's hand holding Felicity's under the table, but she didn't say anything about it and soon left to give their orders to the cook. When will the parking lot part of the project be finished? Felicity asked, changing the topic to something much safer. The cement will be poured this weekend if it doesn't rain. That quick? I thought it would take longer. Allen shook his head. Nope. I've got most of the framework done already. That's great. So next week, you'll start on the dining room? He nodded. Yup. Will you do everything yourself? Felicity asked. Ricky watched the conversation, smiling. She obviously approved of the relationship blossoming across from her. Mostly. There are a few things I'll need help with, but I'll do my best to save them all for the same day, and one of my friends will come in and help. I help him with the same types of things for projects he's involved in. It's good that you have someone you can share the workload with that way. He nodded. Yeah, I worked for him right out of high school, and he taught me everything I know. When I started my own business, we kept in touch, and we help each other now. I couldn't run a bakery without Grace, Patience, and Ricky. Ricky rolled her eyes. You guys don't need me. You do need another person, but at this point, I'm completely disposable. Within a year, I plan to be indispensable. Felicity smiled. You're already getting there. We adore you, and you make our job so much easier. Their food came then, and they all focused on their meals. What kind of cookies are you going to make me tomorrow? He asked. Oh, I'm done baking you cookies. Being spoiled 1 day per month is enough for you. He laughed. I don't think you could stop if you tried. Felicity sighed loudly. You're right. It's a compulsion. I see you, and I want to bake cookies and force feed them to you. I figure you're burning off calories faster than we can shove them down your throat anyway. So you're going to keep feeding me cookies all month, right? She nodded. And then when you leave to go work somewhere else, I'll find your house and bring you cookies every afternoon for the next day, because by that point you'll be trained to eat my cookies every hour, and I won't have it on my head if you go into withdrawals and almost die from lack of cookies in your system. He laughed. I'm glad you've got my back and won't let me die from lack of cookies. So kind of you. And when your son gets back from football camp, I will slowly start adding the excess cookies to his diet as well. I don't know how you two have survived for so long without my cookies. I can't tempt the fates and let you continue on this horrible path to destruction. He looked at her, fork in the air. What if I insist that I want to go down this path to destruction, and more cookies will make me choke, and only bring unhappiness and doom upon me and my household? Then I will sit on you and order Ricky to force the cookies into your mouth. She made a face at him for a moment as if considering. I kind of like the idea of sitting on you. Please refuse more cookies. He laughed, shaking his head at her. You amuse me as much as you frighten me. Felicity looked over at Ricky, who was watching them with wide eyes. Tell him it should be all fear with no amusement mixed in. He has no idea what I'm capable of, does he? Ricky shook her head. Obviously not. He scares me less and less as the minutes tick by, but you scare me more and more. And just think, we're going to be roommates starting tonight. Felicity said with a grin. Allen grinned. Did you two finish up the move? No, but the back of Ricky's car is loaded up with everything she wants to take to the big house. Allen looked over at Ricky. Do you feel comfortable enough with me to let me help? Ricky nodded. You're not nearly as scary as you seemed at the bakery. Now that you're with Felicity, you're not scary at all. Because her scary is overwhelmingly worse than my scary? He asked, winking at Ricky. No, because you put up with her madness and silliness. Any man who will do that can't be bad at all. Allen smiled at that, taking a big gulp of his iced tea. You're right. I'm just a sad little puppy dog. I'll help you finish up that move. Ricky nodded. We'd both appreciate it. Chapter 5. Felicity decided to try a new kind of cookie the following afternoon. She'd always thought that a simple ginger snap with caramel added would be a perfect treat. With Ricky watching, she carefully experimented with a couple of different mixtures, trying to get them just right. Both types of cookie went into the oven at the same time, and when they finished, the 4 coworkers all crowded around. Which do you think is better? Felicity asked. The one with the caramel on top, or the one with the caramel cooked through it? Felicity tried the first, the one with the caramel on top, and almost moaned with pleasure, it was so good. She sighed happily. I think this is my favorite cookie I have ever eaten. Ricky took a bite of the same one, her eyes widening with pleasure. Wow. I never would have put those flavors together, but this is amazing. Patience tried the other cookie, and she grinned. This one is great too. How are we going to choose? Grace tried the same one Patience had. Felicity, these are crazy good. I've never tasted anything like it. They all swapped and ate the other cookie. Each of the women agreed the cookies with the caramel on top had turned out best, so Felicity piled the cookies on a plate and took 2 bottles of water outside. When she reached Allen, he was working away at something, bent over at the waist. Her eyes went to his shoulders, and she wanted to touch him again, but she wouldn't. She knew better, mostly. Allen spotted her standing in front of him and straightened, reaching for one of the bottles of water she'd brought. I was just thinking it must be getting close to cookie time. See? I was 10 minutes late for our regular hourly cookie break, and you noticed it took too long. You do need cookies every hour. He chuckled. You're spoiling me, cookies. I think I like it. He reached for one of the cookies, looking at it with interest. "What do you call this one?" She had no idea, so she said the first thing that came to mind. "Heaven. We call those heaven." He raised an eyebrow, but took a big bite. His eyes closed as he chewed slowly, swallowing the mouthful. "Oh my goodness. Will you marry me?" "Yes. Yes, I will." Felicity knew he didn't mean it, but she'd never admit that to him. He opened one eye and looked at her, staring up at him eagerly. "I was asking the cookie." "Too late now. I've already found my dress." "You had 3 seconds. No one can find a dress that fast." "I had hope make me one. I figured once I found the right man, I'd marry quickly like everyone else in Culpepper." "Now, when should we marry?" "Tomorrow? Saturday?" He shook his head. "You're a crazy little thing." She shrugged. "It's my job to be crazy." "Why?" "Why what? Why is it your job to be crazy?" Allen sighed. The woman was going to be the death of him. "Always has been, I guess." She shrugged. "Now, about the wedding. Since Tristan will be home Saturday, maybe it would be best if we married tomorrow. That will give us a wedding night without a child in the house." She had him when she mentioned the wedding night. He looked at her skeptically. "So you'll marry me tomorrow after work? Just like that?" "Of course, I will. You're perfect for me. You're kind, hardworking, and your zing quotient is out of this world." "And that's all that matters in marriage?" Allen asked, shaking his head. Felicity shrugged. "That's not all that matters, but the rest will come." She stepped toward him, putting her free hand against his bare chest. She loved that he worked stripped to the waist most of the time. "I do think we could make a good life together." He studied her carefully. He had feelings for her that were more powerful than he'd had for anyone in years. Or ever. Slowly he nodded. "Tomorrow afternoon sounds good." He didn't expect Tristan to be exactly pleased by his marriage, so it would be better if he got it over with while he was still at camp. Her whole face lit up. "Really? We're marrying tomorrow afternoon?" He nodded, expecting a feeling of dread to wash over him at the idea, but was surprised to feel nothing but elation. "I'll call Brother Anthony." "Does 5 work?" "Let's make it 7. I can switch shifts with one of the others to get ready, but they're still going to want to be there for the wedding." "Let's get married at Linda's." He shrugged. "That works, I guess. Are you going to come see my place this evening? Once you see my house, you might change your mind." She laughed, shaking her head. "I don't trust myself alone with you." "Not going to happen." He raised an eyebrow at her, questioningly. "Why don't you trust yourself alone with me? Haven't you listened to me at all?" "The zinginess. I would knock you down and jump your bones to feel more of the zinginess." He grinned, unable to help himself. "You would?" "I wouldn't complain about that, you know." She shook her head again. "Nope. Not happening. And I'm not kissing you until Brother Anthony pronounces us man and wife." "What do you think he'll call me?" "No idea." "Does it matter?" "I guess not." "Oh, and you can't really kiss me until we get home to your place. So what do you want me to do when Brother Anthony pronounces us husband and wife?" "Miss your lips?" She nodded eagerly. "Yeah, go just to one side of my lips, and we'll kiss at each other." "Why?" He went along with a lot of her craziness, but he didn't understand this request at all. "I'm afraid once we start kissing, I'm going to go a little bit crazy." His eyes widened. "You think once I kiss you, you really are going to be that eager for sex? You need to be at home first? And preferably lying flat and naked." "Yup." Allen laughed. I don't think my kisses pack that kind of wallop, cookies. Oh, trust me. They will. I got all melty in my girly bits when you kissed my hand. I'd probably end up in a puddle at your feet if you kissed me. Don't you think we should at least see if you like my kisses before we marry? Aren't you listening? Felicity's voice was practically frantic. Puddle woman. He grinned at her, leaning down to kiss her cheek. All right. All right. No puddle woman for me. Brother Anthony at 7 at Linda Culpepper's place. I can do that. Once Felicity was back inside, she looked at the others and let out a short scream. They all looked at her, and Ricky ran to her side. What's wrong? We're getting married. Tomorrow. At 7. Linda's place, so wear something appropriate. Grace, you have to switch shifts with me. Grace shook her head. You can't work on your wedding day. Nope, we'll cover for you. I'll work late. Ricky will take Allen his cookies, don't worry. Was it that obvious? Patience grinned at her sister. Only to people who know you. I'll be there as soon as I'm done with my shift to help you get ready. Can I wear the bridesmaid dress you wore for my wedding? Felicity nodded emphatically. And I sure could use a little butterfly ballerina to dance down the aisle. Patience grinned at the reference to her new stepdaughter, Corinne. You'll have her. Pink all right? Pink is perfect. Felicity looked over at Ricky, who was standing quietly, looking out of place. She knew what the girl was thinking by the look on her face. You're coming. You're in charge of getting the cake that Grace is just about to start decorating there. She looked at Grace with wide eyes. Do you need my help? Grace shook her head. You tell me what you want, and I'll make it happen. Butterflies, of course. Little pink butterflies, to match the most beautiful niece in the whole wide world. I can do that. Ricky frowned. I want to help. Grace shrugged. Have you ever done fancy frosting on a cake? Nope. I guess you're going to learn a new skill today, aren't you? Grace rushed to the freezer and pulled out 4 carefully wrapped layers of a cake. Get over here and help me unwrap. She looked at Felicity. I know you hate cakes, but this is your emergency, so you get to finish up the birthday cake I was working on. Allen will have to make do with the cookies that are already made. I guess he will, but I hate that. Felicity had 2 different varieties she hadn't tried on him yet, but one was just a plain peanut butter with a Hershey's Kiss on top, and the other was peanut butter chocolate chunk with a marshmallow center. Neither were special enough to have baked them for him already, but she knew he'd enjoy them. All right. Starting on cake. As she worked, Felicity watched the time, knowing she still wanted to take Allen his cookies on time for the rest of the day. She'd already done a bit of the decorating when she remembered she needed to call Linda. When the Culpepper matriarch answered, Felicity could hear the children playing in the background. Hello? Linda, it's Felicity. I'm getting married tomorrow at 7. Oh, that's wonderful. Allen? Of course. No one else makes me weak in the knees. Sounds good. I'll be ready. Oh, weddings at your house. Linda was quiet for a moment, and Felicity knew she was making a mental list of everything that would have to be done. All right. Grace taking care of the cake? Yup, and I've already got my dress. Patience is going to wear the same bridesmaid dress I wore. My theme is going to match my flower girl. Butterfly ballerina. Got it. I'll leave some extra space for her to dance as she comes in. Thanks. And Linda? Yeah? You're the best darn wiggy on the whole planet. I hope my kids will get to call you that too. I think within a few years, the whole planet is going to be calling me Wiggy. Linda sounded excited by the idea, not disgusted, and that's all Felicity cared about. I'll be home in a few hours. Are you going out tonight? No, I'm not. Do you mind if I bring a date to the wedding, though? Felicity grinned. I wouldn't have it any other way. Another wedding. You Quinlan girls sure don't do anything slowly, do you? I guess not. She ended the call and put her phone in her pocket, getting back to the cake in front of her. It was a simple frosting job, but she really did prefer cookies to cakes. She glanced over at the layers of cake Grace and Ricky were working on. Grace was talking softly to Ricky, who was holding her own tube of frosting awkwardly and listening intently. She was practicing making small designs on a piece of tin foil, while Grace worked on the cake. When Grace nodded, Ricky grinned and carefully started making her designs on the cake. They weren't as perfect and practiced as Grace's, but they were still beautiful, and that's what mattered to Felicity. Patience approached Felicity and smiled. I think you two will be happy. Felicity nodded. I know we will. He's a good man. He seems it. He's definitely a hard worker, and he makes you tingle. Felicity grinned. He does do that. Let me take him a scone for his next break. No. Take him a scone tomorrow. He's getting cookies from me today. Patience made a face, but she nodded. That makes sense. I'll do that then. Don't start playing big sister and threatening him. He doesn't need to deal with that nonsense. But you're my favorite sister. I'm your only sister. Felicity put the finishing touches on the birthday cake and carried it to the cooler at the back of the store. Time for cookies. I hope he likes sweets. If not, he's been letting you torture him for days. He proposed because my cookie was so good, but we'll pretend he was overwhelmed by my beauty and personality. Patience laughed. I'm sure that was really the case. You're pretty darn special, Felicity. Felicity grinned as she arranged 3 of the peanut butter blossoms on a plate. I hate taking him cookies I didn't make specially for him. I feel like I'm cheating. Patience shook her head. I'm sure he's going to be happy either way. I sure hope so. Felicity grabbed water and used her back to push the door of the bakery open. Ahoy there! Allen turned to her, a big grin on his face. Ahoy there? Why ahoy there? Seemed like the thing to say. She frowned at the cookies on the plate. I didn't get to bake a special batch of cookies for you this time, because my cousin made me finish frosting a birthday cake so she could get started on our wedding cake. And how's the wedding cake coming? He asked, surprised they were already able to frost it. Don't you have to bake the cake first? She laughed, giving him the first bottle of water. Grace keeps layers made up and in the freezer. We have to around here. The weddings happen so fast. That's mainly just you Quinlan girls. She shrugged. And Doc and Nancy too. Well, that's true. I think Nancy and Doc just thought that's the Culpepper way now. It is, isn't it? He just laughed, taking one of the cookies. This is delicious. Of course it is. I didn't bring you an inferior cookie, just not one baked specifically for you. How many different kinds of cookies are in that display case? He asked. She shrugged. A lot right now. I usually bake 2 or 3 different kinds per day, but I've been enjoying baking so many different kinds for you. So I'm not always going to get this kind of treatment? Oh, you will. Not everyone will, of course, but you will. Are you sure I can't kiss you yet? 'Cause that's a statement that really deserves a kiss. She shook her head. Nope. Not yet. He sighed. You're going to make my life difficult, aren't you? Maybe a little. But it's going to be so much fun, you're going to thank me for it. He laughed as she turned to go back inside with her empty plate. Felicity Quinlan was something else. When Felicity got back to the big house with Ricky that evening, she hurried over to Linda. "How are the preparations going?" Linda grinned. "Well, I thought I'd pick flowers tomorrow. I'm making a small reception meal. Just finger sandwiches, sausage rolls, and pinwheels. I figured I'd make some layered dip." "That all sounds wonderful." Ricky stepped up beside Felicity. "How can I help?" "Oh, you don't need to help. I want to." Linda put Ricky to work on the sausage rolls, showing her how to make them. Felicity quickly kissed Linda's cheek. "I need to go call my mother and let her know I'm marrying tomorrow." "Your dad will be home from work, won't he?" Felicity shrugged. "He usually has business meetings on Thursday nights. I should be safe." When she got back to her room, she showered and sat down on her bed to call her mother. She didn't feel as close to her mom as she knew Patience did, but she was still excited to hear her voice. "Mom, it's Felicity." "Felicity. It's so good to hear your voice. How's the bakery? Have you met someone?" Felicity laughed. "Bakery is great. We're expanding, and the contractor and I are getting married tomorrow." "Of course you are. Your father is going to be annoyed." "Don't tell him until Saturday, then." "I won't." There was a pause for a moment. "Then, tell me about him." "His name is Allen Jennings, and he's the sexiest man I have ever seen in my life." I took one look at him, and my knees started melting. Her mother laughed. "Oh, really? Really? All day while he works, I take him cookies every hour. He loves my cookies." "Everyone loves your cookies." "People with good taste do," Felicity responded with a grin. "He's definitely got good taste. He does if he's marrying my daughter." "How are things at home?" Her mom sighed. "You know your dad. I love him, but he's making me crazy. He's all offended that I let you girls go without making sure you'd be properly chaperoned at all times. He keeps asking me where you are, but I haven't told him. I'm afraid he'd try to drag you back to Kentucky since you're not married yet." "Well, we sure don't want that. And after tomorrow, I'll be married and he won't have worry about it." "I'm glad you found a good man. You girls are making wonderful lives for yourselves out there in Wyoming, and that makes me very happy." Felicity smiled. "We really are. I'll have a stepson." "Oh?" Felicity could hear the question in her mother's voice, but there was no censure. "Allen's wife ran off with an underwear model. Long story, but this city lost most of its women to underwear models a few years back." Her mother laughed aloud. "Oh, that's funny. Don't tell your father I laughed." Felicity grinned. "I won't. I'm not going to go into the whole story, but the ex wants nothing to do with Allen or his son, Tristan, so there shouldn't be a lot of battling over Tristan." "Tristan. I like that name." "Me too. I haven't met the son yet. He's been at football camp all week. I wish I could be there with you for the wedding." "Is Patience going to be your matron of honor?" "Of course. And Grace is already working on the wedding cake. Hope made the dress. Now, we just have to marry." There was a pause. "There's been time to do all that? How long have you been engaged?" "A few hours. Because weddings seem to happen really fast in Culpepper, Hope made a dress not long after I arrived so I'd have one ready. And Grace keeps frozen layers of cake in the freezer." "Of course. I should have guessed. Those cousins of yours have always been prepared for anything." Felicity smiled. "That they have. Well, I'm going to go and get ready for bed. I need my beauty rest if I'm getting married tomorrow. Have your sister take millions of pictures and get video if she can. The stories I've heard about that brother Anthony have me in stitches. I'd love to have a chance to see him in action." "I'll tell her." Love you, Mama. Love you too, Felicity. Felicity ended the call and looked down at the phone in her hand. She really did wish her mother could be there. She'd still be surrounded by family, which was important, but having her mother at her wedding, well, it just didn't seem right not to have her there. She looked up at a knock on her door, and Ricky came in wearing her pajamas. Can I sit? Felicity pulled her feet up under her and waved to the foot of the bed. Of course. I feel funny going to the wedding, because I'm just an employee. I'm not family or anything. Oh, Ricky. You know better than that. You're an employee, but you're also a very dear friend. I don't know what I'd do without you. Sleep less, for sure. Ricky grinned. Are you certain? I'm positive. We're very happy to have you here. Linda said I could stay even after you marry, but I'm not sure if that's the right thing to do. Why wouldn't it be? I don't understand. Of course, you'll stay. I'm not family. Felicity made a face. Neither am I. I'm the cousin of her daughters-in-law. Nothing more. I stay here because she's a good, kind-hearted woman. You should stay as well. Really? Linda Culpepper is one of the most amazing women I know. You don't want to hurt her feelings by abandoning her, do you? How would that hurt her feelings? She'd think you just moved here to live closer to me. Felicity sighed. The truth of the matter is you're not ready to live at the Savoy Ranch when Jesse and Valerie are out of town. Stay here. Please. I think we'll all feel better if you do. You really don't think Linda minds? I know she doesn't. She loves having people over. She's one of those people you can drop in on any time. She's a very natural hostess. Ricky finally nodded. Okay. I'll stay. She looked at Felicity. Are you nervous? About being Allen's wife? Not at all. He's a wonderful man, and I love him. I think I fell in love with him the first time I babbled on about nothing and he acted like I was insane. It was great. Ricky laughed. Sometimes I worry about you, Felicity, but I do think he's going to be the perfect husband for you. Felicity nodded emphatically. He is. I couldn't have found a better man.